Enemy leveling in many games can be kind of problematic at times, but Fallout 4 might take the proverbial cake. In terms of it being a severe immersion killer, let me explain. You step out of Vault 111, and if you're anything like me on your first playthrough, you either get killed by or nearly killed by a frickin' blood bug. Not exactly a cazador, but I still wasn't prepared for it. Then you walk into Concord and likely kill the raiders outside with little effort, so the one bug can be more dangerous than a handful of humans with actual weaponry. Although, admittedly not good weaponry. Odd that. Why would you charge somebody armed with a gun with a pool cue? Probably chems. Then you begin to slowly, or quickly, depending on your build, level up. And a lot of enemies follow suit. Now, some enemies getting tougher makes sense. I have done an entire video on that. At first, it seems fine. Some enemies remaining at least theoretically a challenge should be a good thing. Then as you reach higher and higher levels, you start to notice it. A lot of enemies are becoming more bullet spongy, and the higher your level, the spongier they tend to get. If this were one or two enemies per large-scale encounter or area, that would be fine. It would just mean you found the toughest dogs on that metaphorical block. Unfortunately, that is most definitely not the case, especially at higher levels. I do get that there's a point when, say, a pipe weapon isn't going to be enough anymore, and trying to use one against someone in full combat armor, or worse yet, power armor, isn't really reasonable. But should you have to empty an entire clip or more from an automatic weapon to end one combat armored gunner? No, you shouldn't. You should not need a legendary weapon to end the majority of non-unique enemies in an efficient fashion. Yes, there are still lower tier enemies sprinkled in the groups, but at some point the tougher foes seem to outnumber them. And yes, there are areas that never spawn higher tier enemies, but when you go further than a certain point on the map, these underlying issues are still there. A few examples of these issues, the first one being, I distinctly remember hitting a higher level super mutant with a mini nuke to the face. It did not do a lot of damage. And while I admittedly hadn't leveled up the appropriate perks in this playthrough, it is still a small-scale nuclear explosion, and was a direct hit. Even Liberty Prime should have to take a knee at that point, but not this super mutant apparently. Another example is, almost every time I walk into Gunner Plaza to remind those cap-obsessed demons that I don't enjoy their company, I of course do this in the most mature and peaceful manner that is available when dealing with the Gunners. Come here, you! This is for mentally scarring Preston so badly he's stuck in some kind of romantic talking loop with me. He won't give me the damn Warwick Homestead quest now because you broke him, and the only other ways to let me help them is by siding with that group of incompetent mad scientists or having Radio Freedom on 24/7. Have you ever listened to Radio Freedom for several hours straight, you sons of— Oh, I'm sorry, please ignore that. There seem to be multiple higher tier gunners running around the plaza, sometimes several of the same rank. And while I'm aware that's just the game's way of telling you these ones are tougher than the others, it's really immersion breaking to see 3 or 4 high tier gunners wearing full sturdy or heavy combat armor, all with the same rank. The third example is a little weird, because I don't know how gunner cages are supposed to work, at least in terms of how they choose what to spawn. However, when I open 14 or so at once, out pop about half in full or near full higher tier combat armor. Good thing I armed all of my island settlers to the teeth. Now, how could these problems be fixed, or at least mitigated? Well, my first thought is to limit the number of higher tier enemies that can spawn in a group or location, while making those particular individuals significantly tougher so the standouts seem more worthy of your time. After all, one bullet sponge stands out, half a dozen is just a statistic. Another idea is to slightly reduce the number of high-tier enemies, but give the ones that do spawn randomish names and a few randomly assigned unique lines or odd behaviors. These would have to draw from a rather large pool to not become overly repetitive. But while I think it could work from a player's perspective, somebody who knows way more about game development would need to weigh in on that. You could also have certain named or high-tier enemies act different in combat. If someone in the Commonwealth lived to the point where they're that tough, they should also be smart, at least in a fight. Have them break from combat and move away to seek better cover more often. Have them carry multiple types of weapons to cycle through. Imagine if an enemy gunner noticed Ada or Codsworth was closer than you and switched from a ballistic weapon to an energy weapon. More experienced fighters are going to act differently in a fight. Now, could this actually be done? I honestly don't know for sure. However, since robots and wildlife act differently than other enemies, and there are definitely robots flagged as members of the Gunners faction, I suspect it would be possible to add a subset of characters in most faction pools that act somewhat differently in combat. Although I have no game design experience, so I'm not completely sure. I'm basing this on educated guesses. Now, could you just turn the difficulty down? Sure, but you're not doing that in survival mode. And let's be honest, the game greatly encourages playing at higher difficulties. It encourages it so much that it might as well be the default. And if you happen to be a hardcore Fallout player, it is more than likely the default for you. I could probably complain for half an hour about the legendary system. Yeah, maybe another time. So in conclusion, as far as leveling in a video game, especially a single-player RPG goes, as you level up and gain abilities or stat increases, you should feel a sense of progression. And in Fallout 4, you do for a while, and then that sense of progression slows considerably. It can quickly reach a point where you feel like you're wading through waist-high mud to reach the next destination, only to be told the next destination you want to visit after that is at the end of a path of chest-high mud, and it's about to start raining. Perhaps a level cap could have helped as well. It honestly seems to me Bethesda wants to appeal to such a broad demographic that they forgot who and what they used to be, and who they used to make games for. Granted, their ability to create a good leveling system has always been questionable at best. Anybody else remember having to keep a notepad handy while playing Oblivion so later levels didn't become impossible? And that was basically my only real issue with Oblivion, honestly. Well, that's all for now, so thank you for listening to my inane ramblings.